Autism-live. We're very thrilled right now to have Dr. Juergen Hahn join us. We're also deeply appreciative because he was scheduled to be on 2 weeks ago, and we had an emergency, and he was so gracious to reschedule with us. He is the department head of biomedical engineering at Rensselaer Institute, which is a mouthful. But Dr. Hahn, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for being patient with us and rescheduling.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. We're talking with you because you have been involved in some pretty impressive research. First of all, how long and have you been looking at autism in your research, and what made you want to begin looking at autism?
Okay. We've been looking specifically at autism for about the last 5 years.
Okay.
My research is really on machine learning, systems biology, big data. And I've been doing this for over 20 years, but previously it was not for autism. And one of the things that made us really shift into the autism field is that when I looked at what the work being done in this area, I found that really the type of approaches and the algorithms that we've developed was something that was not as widely done. And so I saw that there clearly is a big need, and there's also quite a bit of opportunity in order to basically shift our work into this field. And so what we've done is we still use similar algorithms and approaches that we did before, but now we're looking at autism.
Okay. And you say that you use a big data approach and that helps you to reveal patterns and correlations that otherwise might be missed, and that in fact this has helped you to look at metabolites in the blood that can accurately predict if a child has ASD. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Okay. Yeah, so what we're doing is that we look at many measurements all at the same time. Yeah, so traditionally you measure the concentration of one metabolite, and then you see, is this within what you call normal range, or is it outside of that? And then you may go to the next one. And what we are doing is that we say, no, we look at the entire panel of these measurements together, because if one thing is a little higher than you expect it to be, and another thing a little lower, and the third thing is a little higher, all together, they tell us much more of a story. And what we found, if you look at some particular metabolites that we've been interested in, that really they seem to look different in the children that have an autism diagnosis than the ones that don't. Yeah, and so obviously that kind of can form a basis of a test, because it allows you to essentially classify if does this blood come from a child that has an ASD diagnosis or not, because the algorithm doesn't know if you have a diagnosis or not. It just sees the measurements.
Right.
Yeah, and so that's something that we've done. We have been able to replicate the results, at least to the degree possible, with the data available. And actually some other groups have picked up on that and also worked on trying to replicate that, so that it looks promising at the moment.
Now, I'm gonna beg your forgiveness, but hopefully I'm not the only one. I don't know what a metabolite is. Can you help me to understand what a metabolite is?
It's a component in your blood.
Okay.
And it's a component in your blood. It's basically as your, the functioning of your body, you have components get converted to other things for when you create, be it that you create energy or you have other functions in your body that are going on. And metabolites are basically these components in the blood.
And do we have the ability to change our metabolites? Is that something that we can do? Like if I drink more water, does that change my or do I eat differently to change my metabolites, or no?
Yeah, you can change those things. And and now drinking water is probably, that's not the approach, but the diet has an effect on metabolites.
Okay.
Yeah, and so you can have diet, supplements change metabolites, certainly certain medicines can change metabolites. The key is, if you want to look at interventions, pick some that are more promising than others.
And you actually, in the packet that I received, you say that you have been able, using your research, you are able to analyze whether an ASD treatment is effective. Are we only talking about biomedical treatments, or are we talking about any kind of treatment?
Well, so far we've only looked at a few specific biomedical treatments, and basically what we've, and the way we look at this is twofold. I mean, number one, obviously the ultimate goal is you want to see that the child is doing better, but what we've also looked at is that what's happening essentially with these metabolites in the body. Are the concentration of the metabolites, have they moved closer to what I would consider a normal range in response to treatment? You could potentially do this with other types of treatment, but it's just, it's not something we've done. I don't have any data on it. But there's no, I mean, it's certainly something for people to investigate in the future, but it's not something that we've done so far.
Okay, so far because my next question was going to be, so what have you found? Is something more effective than something else? But you're not at that point yet. It's just that you could potentially.
Yes, I mean, what we've looked at, for example, is that one of the treatments was, what does high dose folinic acid do? If somebody's taken that.
Right.
We've also basically, in currently ongoing work where people did changes to the microbiome, and see, does this somehow, does it show up? So we've done this type of work.
And can you tell us what you found, or is that secret still?
It's not necessarily secret, but at some level, I mean, basically, some treatments tend to seem to work a little better than others. None of them are. I mean, none of them basically there's no cure. Okay,
there's no magic bullet.
Completely normalize it, but some of them show a bigger positive shift than others. I would say the details I would like to wait until paper is published and has been peer reviewed.
I completely respect that. I completely respect that. Now, one of the other things you've been looking at, there's a couple of different things you've been looking at. You've been looking at when there are co-occurring conditions with children. And I'm particularly interested in, you looked at the question, do antibiotics increase gastrointestinal symptoms for children with ASD more than they would other children? So I'm interested in all of this because a lot of people in the autism community are looking at the spectrum and wanting to figure out, why do some things happen to some children and not to others, and why do some children do better than other children? So fascinating to me that you're looking at both of these things. In your literature, you kind of give us an answer about the antibiotic question. Can you share with us what you found out about antibiotics?
Sure. I mean, basically what we were interested in, we know that children with autism in general are diagnosed with more GI issues than children who are typically developing. And on average, children with autism have received more antibiotics earlier in life. And what we wanted to know is is the higher occurrence of the GI problems even later than they've been given the antibiotics? Is this due to the antibiotics, or is this due to other factors? And the factor could just be something related to them having autism. And what we found is that obviously increased use of antibiotic during the first 3 years of life did result in a slight increase in GI issues even during later years of life, like years 4 and 5. However, the big difference between the children who have autism and the ones who are typically developing is really just if you have the autism diagnosis. So we found that the increase due to antibiotics was essentially the same for the children with autism as well as the ones without. And that's important. And so far, is that because you have to figure out if you're a doctor and you think about prescribing antibiotics, do I have to treat the children with autism differently in this case or not? And I mean, the answer is that no. I mean, obviously you need to be careful before prescribing antibiotics, but the effect seems to be the same. That being said, the children with autism on average had twice the number of GI issues than the ones who are typically developing. So clearly there's something in autism that's correlated with many more GI problems.
There we go. But it's not, what you found was that it wasn't being caused by being treated with antibiotics when they already have autism, which is a great thing for parents to know, because I know a lot of people that have concerns about that. So going back to the co-occurring conditions, it's one of the hot topics right now for everyone is phenotyping autism, that the autism community has come to understand, because if it's that old saying of Stephen Shores, if you met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, although we can see that there are sort of groups. Whenever I'm at an autism conference, you watch the moms who will ask certain questions and they're like, oh, your kid is like mine, and your kid is different than mine. And we sort of cluster together because we learn from each other. But I love that science is catching up to that. And you have done some research, and my understanding is that you've been able to see 3 distinct types. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, basically we found, or the work that we did, it made the most sense to really split this up into 3 groups. Yeah, and the way we did this is that we looked at co-occurring conditions that children had over the first 5 years of life, and we basically looked at how many different co-occurring conditions they had. And we also basically did the same type of analysis on a large group of typically developing children. And to put this into context, we had over 280,000 children that were part that when we looked at this. So it's a very significant number. And from these 3 groups, we found that there's roughly a quarter of the children with autism that have very large number of co-occurring conditions. On average, they were more than twice as likely to have those than the typical developing group. And then we had a second group that had fewer co-occurring conditions, but they were more things like developmental delays. So there were a few specific ones that fell into it. And that was roughly another quarter. And then we had about half of the group where they had a few more co-occurring conditions than typically developing, but it was not substantially more. So we really found these 3 subgroups where, yes, some kids, they may not have a lot more co-occurring conditions than typically developing children, while others have a lot more, and sometimes more for certain specific ones.
But you also found that there was a time component, that some of these things happen together. Can you give us an example of what that is?
Okay. So this time component, there was basically, we were interested in figuring out is there a time when children are more likely to be diagnosed with a condition, and we want to correlate that with saying maybe this condition has first really presented itself at that time. And so, for example, when we looked at GI problems, the children with autism generally had more GI problems even before they had a diagnosis and even shortly after birth. But really, after about 1 year of age, there was divergence. The difference between the children with ASD and the ones that are typically developing became larger and larger after that time point. Yeah, and so that's something interesting for us, because it tells us that obviously there must be something going on causing this divergence in the diagnosis of co-occurring conditions. And I don't have the answer for you just yet what that is, but it is certainly a starting point saying, well, that's the time point where things certainly need to be looked at more closely.
It's just fascinating to me, and I'm excited that there are people like you in the world that are looking at these kinds of things, because the basis of this is going to inform a lot of things down the road. So it's like building a scaffold. What do you see? What's sort of your vision? What do you hope? This, I don't even know if this is an appropriate question to ask a researcher, but when all is said and done and you retire, what do you hope you found? Have you thought about that? Or are you just open to whatever it is you find?
No, I mean, luckily I have a few years until I retire.
Yes,
so
you're a
there's
young
a lot
man.
of work that can still be done between now and then. But, I mean, look, there's several things that I'm really hoping to get into with this. I mean, one thing is that I think sooner or later we're going to have some physiological test that helps with the ASD diagnosis. Now this does not replace the current diagnosis, how it's done, but I do think that we have to gain a better understanding for what's happening in the body, and there's something that we can learn from that. Then, I mean, autism is, there's a lot of heterogeneity there, and trying to find some subtypes in order to determine how to best basically deal with this. I mean, some children may better react to certain types of treatments than others. That's something that hopefully we'll get to in the long run. Ultimately, yes, hopefully there are some treatments that help. And I think that's something we're going to contribute to. And now these studies on co-occurring conditions, on the one hand, I hope that we gain a bit more insight on what these co-occurring conditions are. If they happen together, then there's probably some reason that's either developmental or some pathways, biological pathways in the body. Why are these things happening together? That gives us a better insight on what to do there. Yeah. And lastly, I think we have challenges in that if your child goes to doctor and there's certain medical decisions need to be made, then you assume that all the decisions for a child with autism would be the same as the decisions for a child without autism. And I am not necessarily convinced that that's the case. And so we have to figure out, I get a better sense on in which cases can you really make decisions on the same basis, like we found for antibiotics, it doesn't matter there. But there may be other things where you could decide that, well, maybe you need to treat this differently. Like, for example, when do you decide that you need to screen for epilepsy? Is that something that you would do for the same reason or at the same point in time for a child with autism as for one that doesn't have autism but that has other concerns? And I hope that we'll get to a point where we learn more about those things.
Well, I find it really exciting, and I think part of what's exciting for me is that as a mom, and as I've met many other moms over the last 10 years covering autism, you see that, well, for instance, I mean, I'm a big believer in ABA, and I've seen kids make tremendous progress. But I've seen families that didn't make the tremendous progress, and often, if not always, it's because there are co-occurring issues. And if there was a way that we could get to the bottom of that and figure out how to help that population, then it would be huge. It would be very huge. There's so many families out there that are wanting answers to questions and wanting help and support. And as you unlock the keys to that, I think that could be a really powerful thing for our community. So I just want to thank you on behalf of all of us for doing this research and being so passionate about it, because it's people like you that really move the dial on this topic. So I congratulate you on everything that you found, and I can't wait to hear the answers to some of your questions that you can't share with us yet. I'll look forward to seeing those results. So thank you, and thank everyone in Rensselaer for allowing you the time to be with us today, and we apologize for having to reschedule the other day, but thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the kind words, and thanks for having me.
If people have more questions about anything that you're doing or anything that we've talked about here, where should they go, Dr. Hahn, to find out more?
I mean, they can send an email. That's basically...
and I would assume...
I believe you have the believe you have the contact information.
Yeah, I don't want to give your personal email out, but I will say this, that I would encourage people to go to the biomedical engineering website, Rensselaer Institute. It's Rensselaer Institute of Technology, isn't it? Or just
Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute.
There
yes.
we go, Rensselaer.
RPI.edu.
Okay, fabulous. And then you guys can be connected in that way. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye. Hey, thanks for watching Autism Live. To subscribe, click here. And if you'd like to check out some more of our videos, click here.